She was a quiet soul in a world of glitter and noise, a young woman named Amelia, whose simple cardigan and gentle hands seemed out of place behind the gleaming glass counters of Argento and Cie, the city's most exclusive jeweler. He was the manager, a man encased in a suit as sharp as his condescending tone, who believed the world was divided into those who could afford to be there and those who could not. When an elderly woman, frail and dressed in worn clothes, clutched a broken necklace with trembling fingers, the manager saw a nuisance. Amelia, however, saw a person in distress. For her small, forbidden act of kindness, she was publicly fired and humiliated. They had no idea who she had helped. What happened next, when 7 black limousines arrived at her humble door the following morning, would change everything. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. The air inside Argento and Cie was not merely air, it was a curated atmosphere, a carefully filtered, temperature-controlled medium that smelled faintly of polished silver, expensive perfume, and old money. Light did not simply illuminate the room, it was captured and refracted by 1,000 flawless diamonds, each one sitting like a star in its own velvet universe. The carpets were so plush they seemed to absorb all sound, creating a hushed reverence usually reserved for cathedrals or libraries. This was a place where value was measured in carats and clarity, where a single purchase could equal the price of a suburban house. And presiding over this silent, shimmering kingdom was Mr. Sterling, a man who viewed himself less as a manager and more as a high priest of luxury. He moved through the showroom with a predatory grace, his posture ramrod straight, his signature silk tie a slash of crimson against his pristine white shirt. His eyes, the color of cold steel, were constantly scanning, assessing, and calculating. He was a master of the subtle art of exclusion, his smile warming by degrees in direct proportion to the perceived net worth of the person before him. Today, he was in his element, his voice a low, confidential purr, as he leaned over a glass case, presenting the legendary Star of Seraphina diamond to a shipping magnate and his third wife. To Mr. Sterling, the world was a simple ledger of credits and debits, and the people who walked through his door were either assets to be cultivated or liabilities to be swiftly and mercilessly expunged. He had a sixth sense for what he called time wasters, individuals who wandered in not to purchase but merely to look, to dream, to breathe the rarefied air of the wealthy. These people were anathema to him, a smudge on the perfect canvas of his establishment, and he prided himself on his ability to identify and eject them with surgical precision. In stark contrast to this polished, predatory energy was Amelia. She stood near a secondary counter, polishing a silver bracelet with a soft cloth, her movements gentle and rhythmic. Her attire was simple to the point of being invisible in such a setting, a plain gray cardigan over a simple white t-shirt, her hair tied back neatly. She did not possess the aggressive poise of the other sales associates. She had a quiet dignity, an observant stillness that Mr. Sterling mistook for timidity and a lack of ambition. But Amelia was not timid. She was a student of the craft. She didn't just see the price tags. She saw the delicate mill-grain detailing on a platinum ring, the intricate work of a filigree brooch, the soul of the artisan captured in metal and stone. She loved the stories the pieces told, the history they held, the moments they would go on to represent. This deep appreciation was her secret, a quiet rebellion in a place that often cared only for the final, staggering number on a receipt. Her calm demeanor was a source of constant irritation for Mr. Sterling, who had once told her during a performance review that she lacked the killer instinct necessary for high-end retail. He kept her on because her knowledge of inventory was impeccable and her quiet efficiency was useful, but he considered her a piece of plain, necessary furniture in his otherwise dazzling showroom. He often directed new employees to observe his own interactions as the gold standard, pointing out Amelia as an example of what not to do. "Watch her," he had once whispered to a new trainee named Limo. "No fire, no hunger. You cannot sell a dream if you look like you've just woken up from a nap. This is Argento and Cie, not a public library. Remember that." Liam, a young man still impressionable but possessing a core of decency, had watched Amelia and seen not a lack of fire, but a gentle warmth that was absent from everyone else in the store. especially Mr. Sterling. It was into this carefully balanced ecosystem of opulence and arrogance that a small, disruptive element was introduced. The heavy glass door, polished to an invisible sheen, swung open with a soft sigh, and an elderly woman stepped inside. She was the antithesis of everything Argento and Cie represented. She wore a simple, well-worn tweed coat that had seen many winters, and sensible, low-heeled shoes that made no sound on the plush carpet. Her hair was a cloud of soft white, and her face was a roadmap of a long life, etched with the fine lines of laughter and worry. She clutched a worn leather handbag to her chest like a shield, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and bewilderment as she took in the glittering surroundings. Immediately, a subtle shift occurred in the store's atmosphere. The shipping magnate's wife wrinkled her nose ever so slightly. Another couple, inspecting emerald earrings, instinctively took a step away, creating a silent, invisible barrier. Mr. Sterling's head snapped up, his internal alarm bells ringing shrilly. He saw her not as a person, but as a problem, a stain. His smile, which had been plastered on for the magnate, tightened at the edges. His entire posture became rigid, a physical manifestation of his disapproval. He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible flick of his head, a silent order to his other sales associates to ignore her, to let her wander and realize her mistake on her own. He believed that if you ignored such people with enough focused intent, they would simply evaporate. Amelia, from her position by the silver counter, saw the woman enter and felt an immediate pang of empathy. She noticed things that Mr. Sterling, in his haughty assessment, had missed. She saw that while the woman's coat was old, it was made of high-quality wool and was immaculately clean. She saw the intelligent, curious light in the woman's clear blue eyes. Most of all, she saw the woman's vulnerability, the way she clutched her handbag, the slight tremor in her hands as she looked around the vast, intimidating space. She felt a protective instinct rise within her, a quiet defiance against the cold, judgmental air that had settled over the showroom. The elderly woman, whose name was Eleanor, began to drift through the store, her movements hesitant. She kept a respectful distance from the glass cases, her hands clasped tightly behind her back, as if afraid she might break something by merely breathing too close to it. The other sales associates, following Mr. Sterling's silent command, expertly avoided her gaze, turning their bodies to focus more intently on their wealthy patrons, making it clear that their time and attention were precious commodities she could not afford. Eleanor was being systematically rendered invisible, a ghost in a palace of earthly treasures. Mr. Sterling watched her from the corner of his eye, his irritation growing with every second she remained. He saw her as a contamination, a risk to the carefully cultivated brand of untouchable exclusivity he had worked so hard to build. He willed her to leave, to understand that she had breached a sacred wall and did not belong. But Eleanor did not leave. She seemed drawn to a simpler display of vintage lockets, her gaze lingering on them with a soft, wistful expression that Amelia, and only Amelia, took the time to notice. The moment of crisis arrived suddenly and quietly. As Eleanor leaned slightly forward to get a better look at a silver locket, her hand went to her own neck, a habitual, comforting gesture. It was then that the delicate chain of the simple necklace she wore, a piece so modest it was almost invisible, snagged on the collar of her coat. There was a faint, metallic snap, a sound that was imperceptible to most in the silent showroom, but to Eleanor it was as loud as a thunderclap. A small, distressed gasp escaped her lips. Her hand flew to her throat, her fingers fumbling for the familiar weight of the small pendant that was no longer there. Her eyes darted down to the floor, her face pale with panic. The necklace, a thin silver chain with a single, unadorned pearl, now lay in two pieces in the palm of her trembling hand. It was not a piece from Argento and Cie. It was not worth thousands or even hundreds of dollars. To an eye like Mr. Sterling's, it was worthless junk, something one might win at a county fair. But to Eleanor, the sudden, sharp grief on her face made it clear that its value was immeasurable. Mr. Sterling, having finally concluded his sale of the Star of Serafina, was gliding across the floor, his mood buoyant. He had just secured a commission that would pay for a month-long vacation in the Maldives. It was at this peak of his self-satisfaction that he noticed the old woman's distress. His good mood vanished instantly, replaced by a wave of profound annoyance. He saw her fumbling with the broken chain not as a moment of personal crisis, but as a potential scene, an unseemly display of poverty that was disrupting the tranquil flow of commerce. He strode towards her, his steps sharp and purposeful. He did not ask if she was all right. He did not offer assistance. He approached her as a problem to be managed. "Madam," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "Is there a problem here?" Eleanor looked up at him, her blue eyes clouded with worry. "My necklace," she whispered, her voice frail. "It broke. The clasp. I think the clasp is gone." She held out the 2 pieces of the chain in her palm as evidence. Mr. Sterling barely glanced at it, his lip curling in a faint, dismissive sneer. "I see," he said, his voice cold. "However, you must understand that Argento and Cie is a fine jeweler, not a repair shop. We do not service outside pieces, particularly not pieces of this nature." The unspoken insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He was not just stating a policy. He was passing a verdict on her life, on her sentiment. "This establishment," he continued, raising his voice just enough to be heard by the nearby patrons, "is for a certain class of clientele, for those who wish to make significant acquisitions. Perhaps you would be more comfortable seeking assistance elsewhere. There are pawn shops in the less reputable parts of town that might be able to help you." His words were like stones, each one thrown with deliberate, cruel aim, designed to humiliate and expel. From across the room, Amelia watched the entire exchange, her heart clenching in her chest. She saw the cruelty in Mr. Sterling's posture, the smug satisfaction he took in wielding his power over this vulnerable woman. She saw the deep hurt and embarrassment wash over Eleanor's face, the way her shoulders slumped in defeat. Every instinct in Amelia's body screamed at her to intervene, but she was also keenly aware of the store's rigid rules that Mr. Sterling had drilled into the staff with menacing repetition. Rule number 1. The client is always right, provided the client has a 7-figure credit line. Rule number 2. Never, under any circumstances, perform unauthorized repairs. Rule number 3. Do not waste time on individuals who are not there to make a purchase. To help Eleanor would be to break all 3 of these sacred commandments at once. It would mean defying Mr. Sterling directly, a man who held her employment, her livelihood, in his perfectly manicured hands. For a moment, she was frozen, caught between the cold, hard reality of her job and the undeniable pull of her own conscience. She thought about her rent, her bills, the precariousness of her situation. She was not wealthy. She could not afford to be fired for a point of principle. But then she looked at Eleanor again, who was now quietly trying to stuff the broken pieces of her necklace into her handbag, her hands shaking so much she could barely manage it. In that small, defeated gesture, Amelia saw a reflection of her own grandmother, a woman of immense kindness and quiet strength, who had also been made to feel small by the world. The internal conflict ceased. The choice became simple. Some things were more important than rules. Some things were more important than a job. With a deep, steadying breath, Amelia laid the silver bracelet and her polishing cloth down on the counter. She pushed away from the display case and began to walk towards Eleanor, her steps calm and deliberate. Her path took her directly into Mr. Sterling's line of sight, a clear and open act of insubordination. He watched her approach, his eyes narrowing into slits, a storm of fury gathering on his face. He could not believe the audacity, the sheer foolishness of what she was about to do. Amelia ignored him. She focused all of her attention on the elderly woman, her face softening into an expression of gentle concern. "Excuse me," she said, her voice a low, soothing balm in the tense silence. "I'm so sorry to see what happened. Please, allow me to take a look. Sometimes it's just a small link that's come loose." She did not wait for permission. She gently gestured towards a small, quiet alcove near the back of the store, a space used for private consultations that was currently empty. "Let's step over here, away from the main floor," she suggested, creating a small bubble of privacy for the humiliated woman. Eleanor looked from Amelia's kind face to Mr. Sterling's thunderous one, a flicker of hope warring with her fear. She gave a small, hesitant nod and allowed Amelia to guide her away, leaving Mr. Sterling standing alone in the middle of the showroom, momentarily speechless with rage at this blatant mutiny. Mr. Sterling's rage was a palpable force, a simmering volcano beneath his tailored suit. He watched Amelia lead the old woman away, as if she had just slapped him across the face in front of his most valued clients. It was a complete and utter breakdown of the hierarchy he so carefully maintained. An underling, a nobody, a quiet piece of furniture, had not only defied his direct public order but had also sided with a person he had deemed worthless. He felt the eyes of the shipping magnate and his wife on him, their expressions a mixture of surprise and amusement. This, to him, was the ultimate sin. He had lost control of his own showroom. His authority had been challenged, and in his world, a challenge that was not immediately and brutally crushed was a sign of weakness. He straightened his crimson tie with a sharp tug, a symbolic gesture of reasserting his dominance. His face, which had been momentarily slack with shock, hardened into a mask of cold fury. He began to stride towards the alcove, his expensive leather shoes making sharp, angry sounds on the polished floor, the hushed reverence of the store forgotten. Meanwhile, in the relative privacy of the alcove, Amelia was focused on the task at hand. "May I?" she asked softly, and Eleanor, with a trembling hand, placed the 2 broken pieces of the silver chain into Amelia's palm. Amelia didn't just look at the necklace. She examined it with the practiced eye of a true artisan. She saw that the chain itself was old, hand-forged silver, and the pearl, though small and imperfect, had the unique luster of a natural, saltwater gem. It was a piece of quiet, understated quality, its value not in its materials but in its history. The problem was simple. A tiny jump ring connecting the clasp to the chain had warped and opened. For someone with the right tools and a steady hand, it was a 30-second repair. For Eleanor, it was the loss of a treasure. "It's a very simple fix," Amelia said reassuringly, her calm voice a stark contrast to the storm brewing just a few feet away. "I have a small toolkit for minor adjustments. Just a moment." She opened a small, discreet drawer built into the consultation desk, a drawer that was supposed to contain only cleaning cloths and ring sizers. But hidden at the back was her personal set of jeweler's pliers, a small collection of high-quality tools she kept for her own projects, a secret she had never shared. It was at that precise moment, as Amelia held a pair of delicate needle-nose pliers in one hand and the broken necklace in the other, that Mr. Sterling arrived. He stood at the entrance to the alcove, his body blocking the light, his shadow falling over them like a shroud. "What, in God's name, do you think you are doing?" he hissed, his voice low and menacing, a sibilant threat that cut through the air. Amelia looked up, her expression calm, her hand steady. She did not flinch. "I'm helping a customer, Mr. Sterling." "She is not a customer," he snarled, his composure finally shattering completely. He took a step forward, jabbing a finger first at Eleanor and then at Amelia. "She is a nuisance, and you are an insubordinate fool. You were given a direct order. You were told to ignore her. Instead, you defy me. You bring this charity case into a private consultation area, and you use company time to work on a piece of worthless scrap metal. You are actively degrading the brand of this establishment." His tirade was becoming louder, his anger spilling out of the alcove and into the main showroom. The other customers fell silent, their attention now fully captivated by the unfolding drama. Liam, the young trainee, watched from behind a display case, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief and horror. Mr. Sterling turned his attention fully on Amelia, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "I have had it with your passive, sanctimonious attitude, your complete lack of commercial sense. You do not belong here. You do not have what it takes. You are fired, Amelia. Effective immediately. Get your personal belongings and get out of my store." He then wheeled on Eleanor, his face contorted in a sneer of disgust. "And you?" he spat. "Get out. Now. Your presence is no longer welcome." He had made his pronouncement. He had publicly excised the 2 offending elements from his pristine world. In his mind, he had restored order through an act of supreme and necessary authority. The silence that followed Mr. Sterling's outburst was profound and heavy. The air, once thick with the scent of money, now crackled with raw, uncomfortable tension. The few remaining customers looked down, suddenly fascinated by their own shoes, a collective wave of embarrassment washing over them. They had come for a pleasant afternoon of aspirational shopping, and had instead been served a front-row seat to an execution. Liam, the trainee, looked as though he might be sick. He stared at Mr. Sterling, seeing him not as a powerful mentor but as a cruel, petty tyrant. His admiration, which had always been fragile, shattered completely, replaced by a deep and unsettling disillusionment. Mr. Sterling, however, seemed to feed on the thick silence. He stood taller, his chest puffed out, a conquering general surveying a silent battlefield. He adjusted his cuffs and smoothed his tie, his movements precise and deliberate. He had made his point. He had reinforced the unassailable standards of Argento and Cie. In his mind, he had protected the brand from the contamination of poverty and the insubordination of misplaced sentimentality. He was the guardian at the gate, and he had done his duty. Amelia, however, did not crumble. She did not cry or plead or protest. A quiet, unshakable dignity settled over her. With calm, methodical movements, she used her pliers to gently close the warped jump ring on Eleanor's necklace, her fingers steady and sure. The chain was whole again. She held it out to the elderly woman, her expression one of simple, human kindness, as if the venomous tirade of the last few minutes had never happened. "Here you are," she said softly, her voice clear and unwavering in the quiet room. "It's as good as new." Eleanor took the necklace, her hand brushing against Amelia's. She looked from the repaired chain to Amelia's calm face, and then to the furious visage of Mr. Sterling. The fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by something else, something harder and more resolute. It was a look of profound disappointment, but also of steely resolve. She whispered a quiet, heartfelt, "Thank you," to Amelia, a sentiment that seemed to encompass more than just the simple repair. Amelia then turned to Mr. Sterling. She gave a single, brief nod. "I understand," she said. She unpinned the small, silver name badge from her cardigan and placed it carefully on the polished surface of the consultation desk. It was her only act of surrender, but it felt more like a final, graceful bow. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the alcove. She did not look at the other customers or her former colleagues. She walked with her head held high, her simple cardigan a suit of armor, her quiet dignity a shield. As she passed through the heavy glass doors and out into the harsh light of the city, Eleanor followed close behind her, leaving Mr. Sterling alone in the aftermath of his own manufactured storm, the silent, judging eyes of his clientele now fixed squarely on him. Outside on the bustling sidewalk, the sounds of the city rushed in to fill the void. Eleanor gently touched Amelia's arm. "That was a very brave thing you did, my dear," she said, her voice stronger now. "He had no right." Amelia offered a small, sad smile. "Kindness should never be a brave act," she replied. "I'm just sorry that this happened to you. No one deserves to be treated that way." She looked at the older woman, concerned. "Are you all right?" Eleanor simply patted her hand, a strange, knowing look in her blue eyes. "I am more than all right," she said, "and I have a feeling you will be too." Amelia's journey home was a blur of motion and emotion. The rhythmic clatter of the subway train was a metronome counting out the beats of her uncertain future. The faces of the other passengers were a muted backdrop to the swirling vortex of her thoughts. The sharp, cutting words of Mr. Sterling echoed in her mind. "Worthless. Nuisance. You do not belong here." Each word was a small, sharp stone, and she felt the bruises they left on her spirit. She had been fired. Publicly humiliated. All for an act that felt as natural and necessary to her as breathing. She clutched the strap of her bag, her knuckles white, replaying the scene over and over. She felt the sting of injustice, the hot shame of being dismissed so callously in front of so many people. A wave of anxiety washed over her as she thought about the practicalities. Rent was due in a week. Her savings were meager. The job market was competitive, and a reference from Argento and Cie, especially from a furious Mr. Sterling, was now an impossibility. She was, for all intents and purposes, adrift. Yet, as the train rattled on, another feeling began to surface, pushing through the layers of shame and worry. It was a quiet, deep sense of rightness, a profound, unshakable peace. She had not compromised her core beliefs. She had chosen empathy over protocol, human dignity over financial security. In the cold, sterile world of Argento and Cie, she had committed an act of warmth, and she could not bring herself to regret it. When she finally arrived at her small third-floor walk-up apartment, the contrast with the morning's environment was jarring. There were no plush carpets here, only worn wooden floors. No curated lighting, only the soft afternoon sun slanting through a large window. But where Argento and Cie was cold and opulent, her small apartment was warm and alive. It was her sanctuary. Books on gemology and art history were stacked on every available surface. Sketches of intricate jewelry designs were tacked to a corkboard above a simple wooden desk. And on the desk itself, under a magnifying lamp, lay her tools, pliers, files, a small soldering torch, and pieces of silver wire and semi-precious stones. This was her real world, the place where she was not an overlooked employee, but a creator, an artist. She sank onto her worn sofa, the exhaustion of the day finally settling into her bones. She felt a profound sense of loss, not just for her job, but for the beautiful things she had been able to handle and study every day. But as her eyes fell upon her own work, the half-finished pendant on her desk, a small spark of hope ignited within her. She had her skill, she had her integrity. And perhaps, she thought, that was worth more than a job in a place that valued neither. She had stood up for someone. She had refused to let cruelty win. Whatever happened next, she knew she had made the right choice. She had honored her own code, and in the quiet of her own home, that felt like a victory. The next morning, Amelia awoke to the pale gray light of dawn and a heavy sense of dread. The quiet victory of the previous evening had faded, replaced by the cold, hard reality of unemployment. She sat at her small kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea and scrolling through job listings on her laptop. Retail associate, administrative assistant, barista. Each listing felt like a step down, not in status, but in passion. The thought of spending her days in a place that didn't involve the art and craft she loved was a deeply dispiriting one. She felt a profound sense of being lost, of her path having crumbled away beneath her feet. The city outside her window was already humming with life. 1,000,000 people hurrying to their jobs, their purposes, while she sat alone in her pajamas, feeling utterly disconnected. It was in this moment of quiet despair that she first heard it. A low, powerful rumble. A sound so out of place in her quiet, working-class neighborhood that she initially dismissed it as a passing truck. But the sound did not pass. It grew, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards of her old building. Curiosity piqued. She pushed her chair back and walked to the window, pulling aside the curtain. What she saw made her blink, certain her eyes were deceiving her. Lined up along her narrow street, a street accustomed to seeing dented sedans and rusted pickup trucks, was a fleet of immaculate, gleaming black limousines. Not one or two, but 7 of them, parked bumper to bumper, their tinted windows reflecting the mundane brick facade of the building across the way. They were like a visitation from another planet, sleek, silent, and impossibly luxurious. Her neighbors were already beginning to notice. Faces appeared in windows. Mrs. Gable from 2B was peering out her door, her morning paper forgotten in her hand. A group of construction workers down the street had stopped their work, their mouths agape, staring at the unbelievable display of wealth that had descended upon their ordinary block. The limousines were so long they took up nearly the entire length of the street, a silent, powerful statement of intent. Amelia's heart began to pound in her chest. This could not be a coincidence. It was too specific, too theatrical. A knot of nervous energy tightened in her stomach. 1,000 possibilities, each more outlandish than the last, raced through her mind. Was it a mistake? A movie shoot? Was Mr. Sterling so vindictive that he had sent some kind of bizarre, intimidating message? Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Then, the door of the lead limousine opened. A man emerged, stepping onto the cracked pavement of Amelia's street with an air of unruffled calm. He was not what she would have expected. He was not a burly security guard or a uniformed chauffeur. He was a man in his late 40s, dressed in an exquisitely tailored charcoal gray suit that spoke of quiet, generational wealth rather than flashy, new money. He had kind, intelligent eyes and a calm, composed demeanor. He took a moment to survey the scene, his gaze sweeping over the curious neighbors and the astonished construction workers before settling on the third-floor window where Amelia stood, a silent question in his eyes. He seemed to know exactly where he was going. Amelia let the curtain fall, her heart hammering against her ribs. Who was he? What did this mean? A moment later, the sharp, authoritative buzz of her apartment's intercom cut through the silence. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the talk button. Every instinct for self-preservation told her to stay quiet, to pretend she wasn't home. But a deeper curiosity, a sense that this moment was a critical turning point, compelled her to answer. She pressed the button, her voice barely a whisper. "Hello?" The voice that came back through the crackling speaker was calm, clear, and deeply resonant. "Miss Amelia Clark? My name is Harrison Vance. I believe you met my mother, Eleanor, yesterday. May I have a moment of your time? It is a matter of some importance." Vance. The name echoed in her mind. Eleanor. The elderly woman. It all clicked into place with a dizzying, terrifying clarity. The quiet, frail woman in the worn tweed coat was connected to this. To this man. To the 7 limousines currently causing a traffic jam and a wave of neighborhood gossip outside her building. Her mind struggled to reconcile the image of the humiliated woman with the immense power this scene suggested. Yes, she stammered into the intercom. "I'll buzz you in." A moment later, there was a firm, polite knock on her apartment door. She took a deep breath, smoothed down her pajamas, and opened it. Harrison Vance stood in her cramped hallway, yet he did not seem out of place. He simply filled the space with a quiet, powerful presence. His eyes were kind, and he offered her a small, reassuring smile. "Miss Clark," he said, his voice even warmer in person. "Please forgive the intrusion and the rather dramatic arrival. My mother can be insistent on making a point." He paused, his expression turning serious. "She sent me here. First, to express her deepest, most sincere gratitude for your actions yesterday. You showed her a kindness and a dignity that she was not shown by anyone else, and for that, my family is profoundly in your debt." Amelia was speechless, simply staring at him. He continued, his voice laced with a cold anger that was clearly not directed at her. "And second, she has asked me to invite you to accompany me back to Argento and Cie. There is a matter of business that needs to be settled, and she feels very strongly that you should be present for it." The invitation hung in the air, both a request and a command, and Amelia knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that her life was about to change forever. The interior of the limousine was a world unto itself, a silent, leather-scented cocoon that glided through the noisy city streets with an almost imperceptible hum. Amelia sat on the soft, plush seat, feeling utterly out of place in her simple jeans and the clean t-shirt she had hastily thrown on. Across from her, Harrison Vance sat with a relaxed posture, but his eyes held a steely glint of purpose. He had patiently waited while she changed, his courtesy making the surreal situation feel marginally more normal. As the car moved, carrying them away from her familiar neighborhood and towards the heart of the city's financial district, he began to speak, his voice calm and measured, weaving a story that Amelia could scarcely believe. "My mother, Eleanor, has a particular methodology," he began, a wry smile touching his lips. "She is the founder of the Vance Foundation, one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the country. She has dedicated her life to supporting education, the arts, and social justice initiatives. But she came from very humble beginnings, and she has never forgotten the sting of being judged, of being dismissed because of her appearance or her station in life." Amelia listened, rapt, as the pieces began to fall into place. "So, from time to time," he continued, "she conducts what she calls character audits. She visits businesses, charities, even hospitals, dressed simply, without any of the trappings of her position. She wants to see how people are treated when there is no perceived benefit. She believes it is the truest measure of an organization's soul." He leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "Argento and Cie, and its manager, Mr. Sterling, failed her audit more spectacularly than anyone she has encountered in the last 20 years. What you did, Miss Clark, you were the only point of light in an otherwise dark and disappointing experience. You didn't just fix a necklace. You validated her belief that individual decency can still exist, even in the most cynical of environments." He then revealed the final, stunning piece of the puzzle. "The necklace you repaired?" he said, his voice softening. "It was the first gift my father ever gave her, more than 60 years ago. He bought it for her with his first paycheck when they were both just teenagers. He passed away 5 years ago. That simple chain and that imperfect pearl are more valuable to her than the Star of Serafina and every other diamond in that store combined. Amelia's eyes welled with tears, not of sadness, but of a profound, overwhelming understanding. The depth of Mr. Sterling's cruelty and the corresponding depth of her own small act of kindness hit her with the force of a physical blow. "I had no idea," she whispered. "Of course you didn't," Harrison Vance replied gently. "That is the entire point. You acted out of pure empathy. That is a quality my mother and our entire family enterprise values above all else." He paused as he looked out the window, his expression hardening again. "And that brings us to the business at hand. You see, the Vance Corporation, through one of our subsidiary holding companies, acquired the entire Argento and Cie global brand 6 months ago. My mother was conducting her audit to decide on the future of its leadership. Mr. Sterling, in his arrogance, has just made that decision for us." The limousine turned a final corner and came to a smooth, silent stop. Through the tinted window, Amelia could see the gleaming facade of Argento and Cie, its familiar brass lettering shining in the morning sun. The other 6 limousines had already arrived, forming an imposing, intimidating blockade in front of the store. A new chapter was about to begin, and the old one was about to be slammed shut. The grand entrance of the Vance entourage into Argento and Cie was a masterpiece of silent, overwhelming power. The heavy glass door was opened not by a customer, but by a discreet security professional who had emerged from the second limousine. He held the door open as Harrison Vance stepped inside, with Amelia at his side. She felt a tremor of nervous energy run through her, but being in Mr. Vance's calm, resolute presence gave her a borrowed strength. She lifted her chin and walked in, not as a disgraced former employee, but as an honored guest. The atmosphere inside the store was one of utter confusion and barely suppressed panic. The sight of 7 black limousines had sent a shockwave through the staff. Mr. Sterling was, for once, at a complete loss. He had initially assumed the arrival was for him, that some unimaginably wealthy client, perhaps a reclusive billionaire or foreign royalty, had arrived for a private viewing. He had been preening, adjusting his tie, his mind alight with the astronomical commission he was about to make. He had instructed his staff to be on their best behavior, to look sharp and attentive. His greedy excitement had been a palpable energy in the room. Then, he saw the door open. He saw Harrison Vance, a man he recognized instantly from the covers of financial magazines, a titan of industry whose net worth was a subject of legend. Mr. Sterling's heart began to race. This was bigger than he could have ever imagined. He started forward, his best, most sycophantic smile already forming on his lips, his hand outstretched in greeting. But then he saw who was walking beside Mr. Vance. Amelia, in her simple jeans and t-shirt, the girl he had fired less than 24 hours ago. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The smile froze on his face, contorting into a bizarre, horrifying grimace. His outstretched hand faltered and dropped to his side. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, gray pallor. His mind, usually so quick and calculating, could not process the scene before him. It was a logical impossibility, a tear in the fabric of his perfectly ordered universe. Amelia, the worthless, sentimental fool, was being personally escorted by Harrison Vance. The 2 images were so violently contradictory that for a moment he thought he might be having an aneurysm. He blinked, hoping the image would resolve into something that made sense, but it remained, solid and undeniable. His professional veneer, the carefully constructed mask of smug authority he had worn for years, began to crack and crumble in real time. Mr. Sterling's mind raced, desperately trying to construct a narrative that could explain the impossible scene unfolding before him. A misunderstanding. It had to be a misunderstanding. Perhaps this girl, this Amelia, was a distant, poor relation of the Vance family. Perhaps she had lied to them, concocted some sob story to gain their sympathy, and was now trying to use their influence to cause trouble for him. Yes, that had to be it. She was a manipulative, cunning opportunist. He clung to this theory as a drowning man clings to a piece of wreckage. It was the only way to preserve his own sense of rightness, his own authority. He took a shaky breath and forced his frozen features into what he hoped was a welcoming, professional smile. "Mr. Vance, "What an unexpected honor," he said, his voice a full octave higher than usual, a strained, reedy sound. He strode forward, deliberately ignoring Amelia, angling his body to block her from the conversation, as if she were a mere piece of luggage Mr. Vance had brought along. "Welcome to Argento and Cie. Had I known you were planning a visit, I would have arranged a private showing. How can I be of service to you today?" Harrison Vance did not smile back. He did not extend his hand. He simply stopped a few feet from Mr. Sterling and looked at him with an expression of cold, clinical appraisal, the way an entomologist might study a particularly unpleasant insect. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. "Mr. Sterling," Mr. Vance said finally, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight that seemed to suck all the air out of the room, "I am not here to shop." He then took a deliberate step to the side, bringing Amelia back into the center of the confrontation. He placed a gentle, protective hand on her shoulder. "I am here because of a grave error in judgment, an error that you made yesterday." Mr. Sterling's fragile composure began to disintegrate. Sweat beaded on his upper lip. I'm not sure I understand, sir," he stammered, his eyes darting frantically between Mr. Vance and Amelia. "This employee," she was terminated for cause. A clear violation of company policy. She was unprofessional. "Unprofessional?" Mr. Vance interrupted, his voice dropping even lower, becoming even more dangerous. "You think it is unprofessional to show basic human decency to an elderly woman in distress? You think it is a violation of policy to treat a human being with respect, regardless of what they are wearing?" He took another step forward, closing the distance between them. The other employees of the store were frozen in place, watching the public dismantling of their once terrifying boss. Liam, in particular, watched with a sense of awe and profound, righteous vindication. This was the moment he had unknowingly wished for when he had seen Amelia fired. "Let me be perfectly clear, Mr. Sterling," Harrison Vance continued, his voice a quiet storm of controlled fury. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The sheer, unshakable authority in his tone was enough to make every person in the room feel its chilling effect. "The elderly woman you so publicly humiliated yesterday was Eleanor Vance, my mother." He let that information land, watching with detached interest as the last vestiges of color drained from Mr. Sterling's face, leaving it a sickly, mottled gray. He looked like he had been physically struck. "You did not see a person," Mr. Vance went on, his words precise and cutting. "You saw a balance sheet. You saw a non-customer, a time waster, a nuisance to be disposed of. You berated her, you insulted her, and you drove her from this store. In doing so, you revealed the true culture of this establishment, a culture you have personally cultivated, a culture of arrogance, of superficiality, and of profound moral bankruptcy." Each word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of Mr. Sterling's career. "And then," Mr. Vance said, turning his gaze for a moment to Amelia with an expression of deep respect before turning back to the terrified manager, "you fired the one employee who demonstrated the very qualities our organization purports to value: integrity, empathy, and a genuine concern for people over profit. You fired Miss Clark for fixing my mother's necklace, a piece whose sentimental value is greater than the entire inventory of this store. You did not just make a mistake, Mr. Sterling. You committed an act of such staggering incompetence and poor judgment that it is, frankly, breathtaking." He paused, allowing the full weight of his condemnation to settle. The silence in the store was absolute. The only sound was the faint, desperate wheezing of Mr. Sterling's breath. He opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, to beg, but no words came out. He was a man who had built his entire identity on a foundation of smug superiority, and that foundation had just been pulverized into dust. He had judged the world by its cover, and had just discovered that the book he had thrown in the trash was, in fact, the one that owned the entire library. His reign, he knew with a sickening final certainty, was over, and the fall would be a long and brutal one. The final blow was delivered not with anger, but with a quiet, administrative finality that was somehow even more devastating. Harrison Vance gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to one of the men who had entered the store with him, a man in a dark suit who had been standing silently by the door. The man stepped forward, holding a simple manila envelope. "Mr. Sterling," Vance said, his voice now devoid of all emotion, flat and businesslike, "your tenure as manager of this establishment is over. Your employment with the Argento and Cie brand, and any and all subsidiary companies of the Vance Corporation, is terminated, effective immediately. The man in the suit handed the envelope to Mr. Sterling, whose hand trembled so badly he could barely take it. That envelope contains the legal paperwork, Vance continued coolly, and our security team will now escort you from the premises. You will be allowed to collect your personal belongings from your office under supervision. After that, you are not to set foot in this or any other of our properties ever again. It was a complete and total erasure. The public humiliation he had inflicted upon Amelia was now being returned to him, but without the theatrical anger. It was a cold, efficient, and absolute removal. Two large men in suits, who had been waiting discreetly, moved to flank Mr. Sterling. He looked wildly around, his eyes pleading, searching for an ally, for a lifeline, but finding only the cold, unforgiving eyes of Harrison Vance and the stunned or averted gazes of his former staff. His authority, his power, his very identity within these walls had vanished in an instant. He was no longer the high priest of luxury. He was just a man in an expensive suit being unceremoniously kicked out. As the security detail gently but firmly began to guide the shell-shocked Mr. Sterling towards his former office, Harrison Vance turned his full attention to Amelia. The coldness in his expression vanished, replaced by a warm and genuine smile. The entire atmosphere in the room seemed to shift with his gaze, from one of tense confrontation to one of hopeful new beginnings. He addressed not just Amelia, but the entire assembled staff, his voice now filled with a calm, forward-looking energy. Yesterday, this store failed a critical test of its character, he announced. But it was not a total failure. One person here understood what it truly means to represent a brand that values artistry, history, and human connection. One person acted with grace, skill, and profound integrity, even at great personal cost. He looked directly at Amelia. "Miss Clark," he said, his voice resonating with sincerity. "On behalf of my mother and the Vance Corporation, I would like to offer you a position. We do not want you to simply have your old job back. That would be an insult to your talent. We would like you to become the new head of a bespoke design division for Argento and Cie, a department that we will fund and build around you. A department that will focus on creating unique, personal pieces that celebrate sentiment and story, not just carat weight. We want you to infuse this entire brand with the values you so clearly embody." Amelia stood in stunned silence, the magnitude of the offer washing over her in dizzying waves. Head of a new division, built around her. It was a dream she hadn't even dared to articulate to herself, a fantasy she had explored only in the quiet of her small apartment with her sketches and silver wires. For a moment, she felt a surge of panic, a voice of self-doubt whispering that she was not qualified, that this was all too much, too fast. She looked from Mr. Vance's expectant, kind face to the shocked expressions of her former colleagues. She saw Liam, the young trainee, who was now beaming at her with undisguised admiration and joy. She thought of Eleanor Vance, the woman whose quiet strength had set this entire, unbelievable chain of events into motion. And in that moment, the fear subsided, replaced by a deep, calm sense of purpose. This was not a random miracle. It was the consequence of a choice she had made. The universe had not given her this opportunity. She had earned it. She had earned it when she walked across the showroom floor to help a stranger. She had earned it when she faced Mr. Sterling's fury without flinching. She had earned it by choosing her own integrity over his twisted sense of protocol. She took a deep breath, her posture straightening, her quiet dignity now imbued with a newfound, gentle authority. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice steady and clear, carrying across the silent showroom. I don't know what to say." "I am deeply honored." She paused, choosing her next words carefully, knowing that this was her first act in her new, unspoken role as a leader. "I believe that the true value of a piece of jewelry isn't in its price tag, but in the story it tells and the human connection it represents. If I can help build a department that honors that belief, then I would be proud to accept your offer." Her acceptance was not giddy or triumphant. It was earnest, heartfelt, and full of a profound sense of responsibility. It was the perfect answer. Harrison Vance's smile widened. "Excellent," he said. "We will have the contracts drawn up this afternoon. Welcome to the team, Miss Clark." I have a feeling you are going to do extraordinary things." He then turned to the rest of the staff, his expression becoming one of firm but fair leadership. "Let today be a lesson to all of us," he said. "Our business is not just selling luxury goods. It is about celebrating the most important moments in people's lives. From this day forward, the culture of Argento and Cie will be one of empathy, respect, and inclusivity. We will judge our clients not by the labels they wear, but by the content of their character. Miss Clark will be leading the way with her new division, and I expect all of you to learn from her example." His gaze fell upon Liam, who stood listening intently. "You," Vance said, pointing a finger. "What is your name?" "Liam, sir." The young man stammered, his eyes wide. "Liam," Vance repeated. "My mother mentioned that you were the only other person in the room who looked at her with kindness. You have a good heart. We need people like you. See me after this is all settled. We'll talk about your future here." It was a day of reckoning, a day of vindication, and a day of astonishing new beginnings. The old guard had fallen, and a new, more compassionate era for Argento and Cie was about to dawn. 6 months later, the transformation of the Argento and Cie flagship store was nothing short of miraculous. The cold, intimidating reverence of the old regime was gone, replaced by an atmosphere of warmth and welcoming elegance. The lighting seemed softer, the air less rarefied. Music, a gentle classical score, now played softly in the background, making the space feel less like a museum and more like a beautiful creative studio. The most significant change, however, was in the people. Under the new general manager, a woman promoted from within who shared the Vance family's vision, the staff had been retrained. The focus was no longer on aggressive sales tactics and client profiling, but on storytelling, on connecting with customers, on discovering the why behind their purchase. And surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly at all, business was booming. The store had developed a new reputation, not just as a place to buy expensive things, but as a place to be treated with genuine respect and care. Wealthy clients, tired of the cynical fawning they received elsewhere, flocked to the store, drawn by its newfound soul. At the heart of this transformation was Amelia's new venture, the Atelier of Sentiments, a bespoke design studio located in what was once a series of stuffy, unused back offices. The space had been completely renovated, turned into a light-filled workshop with state-of-the-art equipment and comfortable consultation areas. Here, Amelia thrived. She was no longer a quiet, overlooked employee, but a confident, celebrated artist. She spent her days meeting with clients, listening to their story, a grandmother wanting to incorporate stones from 3 generations of wedding rings into a new piece, a husband wanting to design a pendant that captured the exact shade of his wife's eyes, a woman wanting to create a bracelet to commemorate her victory over a long illness. Amelia would sketch, design, and then bring these stories to life in gold, platinum, and precious stones. Her work was acclaimed for its unique beauty and its deep emotional resonance. She had a team now, including Liam, who had become her passionate and dedicated apprentice. His natural empathy and kindness, once seen as a weakness by Mr. Sterling, were now considered his greatest assets. He was learning the craft from Amelia, but more importantly, he was learning her philosophy, that the hands that make a piece must do so with respect and understanding for the story it will carry. Amelia was happy, fulfilled in a way she had never imagined possible, her talent not just recognized but celebrated and nurtured. The story of what happened to Mr. Sterling became a quiet, cautionary tale whispered among the city's luxury retail community. He was not, as some might have wished, cast into abject poverty. The Vance family was not cruel, but his fall from grace was absolute and public. He was blacklisted from every high-end brand in the city and beyond. The Vance Corporation's reach was long, and the story of his spectacular failure of judgment had spread like wildfire. No reputable jeweler, gallery, or luxury automaker would touch him. The man who had defined his entire existence by his association with wealth and exclusivity found himself permanently exiled from that world. The last anyone had heard, he had taken a job managing a mid-range electronics store in a sprawling suburban mall. He was selling warranties for televisions and mobile phone plans. The story was not told with glee, but with a sense of karmic inevitability. He was no longer in a position to judge anyone by their appearance. He now had to be polite to teenagers in ripped jeans and harried parents with screaming children. He was forced, on a daily basis, to learn the lesson of humility that he had so arrogantly refused to embrace. The narrative in the industry was that he was being given a chance to rebuild his character from the ground up, to learn that respect was not a commodity to be dispensed based on a customer's credit score. Whether he was capable of learning that lesson remained to be seen, but the universe had certainly provided him with the most thorough and unforgiving of classrooms. His story served as a stark reminder that arrogance is a fragile shield, and that the people you dismiss on your way up might be connected to the very powers that can orchestrate your journey back down. The comeuppance was not a loud, dramatic explosion, but a quiet, life-altering realignment, a fittingly sterile end to a career that had been built on a foundation of cold, heartless calculation. His fate was a moral lesson framed as a second chance, a final, quiet act of the moralistic justice that had begun with a simple, broken necklace. One bright autumn afternoon, the bell above the door of Argento and Cie chimed softly, and Eleanor Vance walked in. This time, she was not the frail, hesitant woman in a worn tweed coat. She was dressed in an elegant, royal blue dress, her white hair perfectly coiffed, a string of lustrous, real pearls not the simple one from her old necklace, but a magnificent strand gracing her neck. She radiated an aura of quiet power and immense warmth. The new staff recognized her instantly, not just as the owner, but as the living symbol of the store's new philosophy. They greeted her with genuine smiles and respectful deference. She asked for Amelia, and was shown back to the atelier of sentiments. Amelia was at her workbench, putting the finishing touches on a delicate gold brooch. She looked up as Eleanor entered, and a wide, bright smile spread across her face. This was no longer a meeting between a customer and an employee, or a beneficiary and a benefactor. It was a reunion of friends, of kindred spirits. They embraced warmly, two women from vastly different worlds who had been brought together by a single, shared moment of integrity and injustice. "Eleanor," Amelia said happily, "it's so good to see you. How are you?" "I am wonderful, my dear," Eleanor replied, her blue eyes twinkling, "especially when I see what you have built here. You have filled this place with light." She looked around the beautiful workshop, at the sketches on the walls, at Liam, who was carefully setting a small sapphire, at the tangible evidence of Amelia's success. "I came to see the final piece," Eleanor said, her voice full of anticipation. Amelia's smile grew wider. She walked over to a velvet-lined tray and picked up a stunningly beautiful necklace. It was a new creation, made of fine, woven platinum, and at its center, nestled in a delicate, modern setting that amplified its simple beauty, was a single, small, imperfect pearl. Hanging beside it, incorporated seamlessly into the design, was the original, simple silver clasp from her old necklace, the one Amelia had repaired that fateful day. "I wanted the heart of the story to still be there," Amelia explained softly. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she took the necklace. It was the perfect fusion of her past and her present, a tribute to the enduring love it represented and the new beginning it had sparked. It was a symbol of how something small and sentimental, something that a man like Mr. Sterling had deemed worthless, could be the foundation for something truly magnificent. "It's perfect, Amelia," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It is absolutely perfect." The circle was complete. The act of kindness had not just been rewarded, it had been immortalized. So, we must ask ourselves, how often do we make the same mistake as Mr. Sterling? How many times a day do we glance at a person and write their entire story based on the clothes they wear, the car they drive, or the neighborhood they live in? The world tells us to value the surface, to admire the shine, to quantify worth in dollars and carats, but the most valuable treasures are rarely the ones that glitter. True worth is found in the quiet corners of the human heart, in acts of unrewarded kindness, in the courage to show empathy in a world that often encourages indifference. Amelia's story is a reminder that a single, decent act can have ripples that change not just one life, but the entire culture of a community. She did not seek power or wealth, yet she achieved both, simply by refusing to compromise her own humanity. What genius do we overlook because it is not dressed in a suit and tie? What love and history do we dismiss because it is contained in a simple, worn object? Never forget that the person you help, the person you defend, the person you treat with dignity when no one else will, might just hold the key to your own future. True wealth is not what you have, but what you give. And the kindest heart is the most precious gem of all. What you do when no one is watching is who you truly are. Always choose to be the person who stops to fix the broken necklace.